Well, this morning I want to talk about a woman whose story we find in the book of Exodus. And I think that next to Jesus' mother, this woman we're going to look at today probably showed one of the greatest examples of a mother's love and devotion that she had for her child. I don't think there's any other job in the world that demands skill, knowledge, understanding than being a mother. Obviously, I can't tell you everything the mother feels, everything a mother does, but in her everyday function, every day raising her kids, she fills so many different roles. So today I'm going to, like I mentioned, I'm going to look at a woman in the Old Testament. She faced her own crisis. She lived in very difficult circumstances. Her name was Jochebed, and she was the wife of Amram, and she was the mother of Moses. And she gave birth to a son in a time when Pharaoh had decreed that all male babies should be thrown into the Nile River and they should be drowned. So she tried to conceal his birth for a time, and after a while it became impossible to keep him quiet and be able to keep him hid. So when she could no longer hide him, she came up with a plan, and we're going to look at that plan and what she did today. So I'm going to be starting in Exodus chapter 1. I'm going to be reading out of the NIV version of the Bible. It starts out telling us the names of the sons of Israel. Israel, you know, was Jacob. His name was changed to Israel after he struggled with the Lord all night. And most of you know the story of Joseph, how he was sold by his brothers into slavery in Egypt. He was raised up to be second in command over the whole nation of Egypt. And when they went into Egypt, Jacob's family tells us in verse 5 that there were 70 people in all when they first went into Egypt. But now as we read the story today, there's well over 2 million. We don't know the number exactly because it tells us the number of men plus women and children. Verse 6 starts out, it says, "Now Joseph and all of his brothers and all that generation had died. But the Israelites were fruitful, they multiplied greatly, and they became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them." Now in Egypt, sometimes I don't know if we totally understand this, but the Hebrew children, the Israelites, lived in a part of Egypt that was known as Goshen. They didn't necessarily live amongst all the Egyptians all the time, but the Egyptians were going to rule over them. So they had a new king. He did not know Joseph, it says. But he said to the people, the Israelites have become so numerous, there's too many of them, that we have to deal shrewdly with them, or they're going to become so numerous that if a war breaks out, they're going to join in the war against us, and they're going to fight us, and then they're going to leave the country. And Genesis chapter 15, verse 13 tells us that they were in slavery for 400 years after this took part, where they decided there's too many, we're going to make them slaves. So they were in slavery for 400 years. Verse 11 says they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built 2 cities, Pithom and Ramses, and it says but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. I think that's interesting. When you look through the Bible, every time somebody tried to destroy God's people or the believers, instead of destroying them, they would grow. Many times they would be scattered, but then wherever they were scattered to, they would multiply, they would grow, and that's just the way God works. says the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and the more they spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. Verse 14 says they made their lives bitter with hard labor. Verse 15, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah. Now apparently these two women, there were so many of the Israelites, I think these two women were in charge, overseers of all the midwives. So the king told these two women, when you help the Hebrew women giving birth, if it's a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. In other words, if we continue to do this, eventually the Hebrews are going to die off, and we will have total control of them. But the midwives, verse 17 says, they feared God and they did not do what the king told them to do. They let the boys live. So the king summons the midwives and he says, why have you done this? Why are you letting the boys live? The midwives said the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They're vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. Now maybe in some cases that was true, but overall that was a lie. But they feared God more than they feared the king. Verse 20 says, so God was kind to the midwives, people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them their families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all of his people, every boy that is born, throw him into the Nile, we'll let the girls live. If the Hebrew midwives aren't going to do it, we'll do it. So we want you to go through the Hebrews' homes, their communities, and when you find out there's been a baby boy born, you take them and you throw them in the Nile River. Feed them to the crocodiles. So that kind of tells us what leads up to this woman that we're going to talk about. Chapter 2 says, there is a man in the house of Levi married a Levite woman. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. Now I would tend to think that every mother that looked at their newborn baby would say that they were a fine child. So she hid him. But then it says after 3 months, she couldn't hide him anymore. She had to be living in fear all the time. What if they hear him cry? She would have to keep him from crying. She would have to keep him hidden. Came to the point where she thought, I can't do it anymore. If they come to our house and find him, they're going to kill him, and I don't know what they would have done to her. I'm sure that wouldn't have been good either. So it says that she got a papyrus basket, coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and she put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. There are some times in our lives, and if you're a parent, I think you know this. If your kids are little, you're going to find it out. But there's going to come times when, like what she did, is you're going to come to the point where you can pray, but you have to place your child in God's care. You have to say, God, I've done what I can do. I'll continue praying for them, but God, I'm turning them over to you. I want you to take care of them. That's what she was doing. And that's basically what we do when we dedicate babies. We're saying, We're going to raise them up, do the best we can do, but ultimately, God, we're dedicating them to you, so we are trusting you to watch over them. Verse 5 says, the Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it, and she saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered, and the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So she took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. Pharaoh's daughter, the very person that said kill him, now is providing for him through his daughter. God works in such great ways, doesn't he? And this whole thing, when we read this, we read it and it's really interesting and it's really good. But I think there's more to it than what we read, because I don't think they just happened to place him in a certain spot in the river hoping that somebody would come along. I have to believe that the mother and the daughter's name was Miriam. If you read through the Old Testament, you find out that Moses had two older siblings, Miriam and Aaron. So I think the mom would either go down to the river, but I think she most likely probably sent her little daughter, Miriam, I want you to go down and we need to come up with some kind of a plan. So I think they heard, well, Pharaoh's daughter goes down with her attendants every so often and she bathes in the Nile. So kind of go from a distance and just kind of watch and see if there's certain times when she comes down or if there's certain days. Where does she go when she goes to the Nile? I think they planned all that out. I think they planned ahead of time. So now they have observed what happens. So now I have to do something with this baby, or he's going to be taken, he's going to be killed. So she takes the reeds that grow in the river, she weaves a basket out of them, she takes tar and pitch, she lines it inside, outside, make it waterproof, puts him in there. I think she gives him to Miriam. Miriam knows what time Pharaoh's daughter's, about what time she's going to be coming to bathe, where she's going to be coming to bathe. Take him down, hide him in the rushes, hide him, kind of hide him, but make it so he can be seen if he makes noise, if he cries, which it tells us he did. And sure enough, here comes Pharaoh's daughter. And they see this basket out there. She hears this noise, this crying. What's this crying? And they look, and here's this basket. And she has compassion on this baby. It says she knows it's one of the Hebrew children. But yet, she has such compassion on this baby that she takes the baby and wants to make it her own. But Moses' sister, Miriam, is watching this whole thing from a distance. She sees them get baby Moses. They pick up the basket. And I don't think this was part of the plan. I think this is something that Miriam came up with, and she couldn't have been very old. She goes to Pharaoh's daughter, and she says, wow, you got this baby. Do you want me to go see if I can find one of the mothers that lost their baby and see if I can get one of the mothers to nurse him? Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, I'll go find one. So she goes and gets Moses' mother. And to top all that off, she's reunited with her baby, and besides that, she's getting paid to take care of her baby. Is God good, or is he good? king's law said kill the baby. God had a different plan. Jochebed decided that there's a higher law. The midwives decided, I'm not going to kill these babies. You know, they knew that life is precious. They knew, too, that nobody has the right to take the life of a baby except God. And when he does do it, it's painful, but yet we know that the baby is with God in heaven, and one day we'll see that baby again. She wanted to protect her child. So she carefully makes this little basket, this little ark for Moses. Carefully selects the spot to place the basket. Placed her daughter there to watch so that she would know the outcome. But I don't think she knew what the outcome was going to be, that she's going to get her baby back to nurse and to raise up to a certain point. Her child came first. And I think she let her motherly, God-given instincts take over, trust God for protection and what she was going to be doing. She's disobeying the authority, but in this case, she's obeying God's authority. And if someone asks you to do something that goes directly against God's will or God's authority, then I don't believe it's a sin. So she would do whatever it would take to keep her child out of danger. How many of you have ever tried to catch so that you could take care of a poor little bird called a killdeer that seems to be injured so badly? I remember as a kid, I did it a couple times. I guess usually it was out in the alfalfa field, and I'd see this bird all of a sudden. It would start making a bunch of noise, and it would be going sideways, dragging its wing, and I thought, well, that poor bird, but I never could catch it. A killdeer has built-in instinct. If something gets close to its nest, it will lead it away by pretending it's hurt. In fact, this morning when I went to unlock the back door, I looked out and there was a killdeer back there. I didn't bother to go out and try and catch it, but there was one out there. But they built-in instinct. I'm sure that without any doubt that she prayed for Moses' safety. She prayed that this plan would work. And I think before she placed him in this basket that she put him in the hands of God. And I believe that God hears the prayers of mothers. You know, this ark, this basket, you could serve the same purpose as the ark in Noah's day. This baby was saved. And when she put it in the Nile, it's just like when it comes time, at the point in our lives with our children, there comes the point where we have to put our children into the Nile, which we would call the world. They're going to go out, and they're going to have to make their own choices. Yes, we continue to pray for them, help them to a certain degree, teach them to fend for themselves, but there comes that time. And that's basically what Jochebed was doing when she placed him in that Nile. She was placing him into the world, hoping that he'd be taken care of. I think mothers, in fact, I know, at least our kids' mother, I know they pray when everybody else is sleeping. And I believe, again, that God hears those prayers. I believe that they pray when somebody in the family is straying away from God, or maybe we don't even know what they're doing or where they're at. But the mother will pray. And when she finds out everything's okay, she thanks God for honoring her prayers. Because that's what he does. And there are many times in our lives when all we can do is to trust God. Mother's prayers can be very comforting. To know that your mother is praying for you can give you just a feeling of safety, unless you're doing things you shouldn't be doing. Then a mother's prayer can become pretty irritating. And I think of years ago, I heard Jesse Duplantis. I don't know, some of you may know who he is, but he's a popular preacher now. Well, when he was a teenager, he was in a rock band. Wasn't living a good life. But he said he knew that his mother was praying for him, and it made him miserable sometimes. And I don't know where he was. He said one time they were going to be playing somewhere, and it was not a good place to be. And he called up his mother, and he said, "Mama, quit praying for me." She says, "What are you doing in that hellhole?" She didn't know where he was, but she knew it wasn't good because she had been talking to God. But he looked back and he knew when his mother was praying for him. So mother's prayers can be comforting, or if you're running from God, they can be pretty irritating. But thank God for mothers who pray for their children, because you don't want them to stop. Mothers, grandmothers, aunts, uncles, great-grandmothers, dads, too. But this is Mother's Day. Jochebed was persistent. She showed self-control. She decided that no matter what it cost her, she was going to do what she felt was best for her little baby boy. She was faithful to God. She got her strength from God, knowing that whatever happened would be okay. If they did find him, if an outcome didn't turn out good, I'm sure she knew that she would one day be reunited with him. But she trusted God. She sheltered the baby. She was willing to give him up. There's nothing more she could do at that point. You know, when I was putting this together, I was thinking of a story with Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived. And I looked briefly, I couldn't find the story, but it goes something like this. There was two women who had just had babies. And during the night, if I remember right, the one mother unknowingly rolled over on top of her baby and smothered it, and it died. So she snuck into the other lady's house and swapped babies. And when the mother woke up in the morning and looked at this dead baby, but she knew it wasn't her baby. So she went to King Solomon, and she found out that, I don't know how she found out, but she found out this other woman had her baby, that she had swapped them. So she went to Solomon and said, "That woman has my baby. Her baby is dead." This other woman says, "No, this is my baby. The dead one is hers." Solomon didn't know who to believe. So he called for somebody, and he said, "Take the baby, take a sword, cut the baby in half, and give half to each one of the women." The one woman says, "No, don't do it. Give the baby to her." Solomon says, "You are the mother." Because she did not want to see her baby get killed. Jochebed was a woman of faith, and she reared a mighty man of godly principles, godly character. She taught him the ways of their forefather Abraham. God's people were in trouble, and God was raising up the seed of Abraham, who's going to lead their people out of bondage through Moses. In Psalm 11, verse 3, David said, "If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do?" But in verse 4 it says, "The Lord is in his temple, the Lord is on his heavenly throne. God is still on his throne. But I think we come to that point in our lives where we think, what are we going to do? I don't know what to do. And David came to that point. He came to that point more than once. But then he would be reminded, God is still on his throne. God is still in control. And he still got it. So we need to just trust him. We can't let our faith and our trust in God be destroyed. And the enemy tries to do it every day. He tries to plant doubts in your mind. He tries to tell you that your child isn't going to be okay. That's what the enemy does. But God is on his throne, and he's still in charge. So moms, you are raising a son or a daughter and a daughter, whatever it might be, but you are raising children that God has a plan for them, and his plan is to use them for his glory, for his kingdom, a plan to bless them, a plan to prosper them. Might not always be in money, but it's going to be in different ways, because that's what God does. Jochebed would not only lead a nation through Moses, she gave us the man who brought us the law of God and the 10 Commandments. You think of everything that Moses did. You know, at one point, they were out into the wilderness, and God talked to Moses, and he said, Moses, I am sick and tired of these people whining and complaining. Step aside. I'm going to destroy them all, and I'm going to start over through you. Moses said, if you're going to kill them, kill me. God, God, if you do that, these other nations that are watching, they're going to say, oh, their God wasn't big enough. Moses bartered with God. Now, was God really going to do it, or was he testing Moses' faith? I don't know. But Moses was a mighty man. And Moses still has an impact on us because of the influence that his mother's faith in God had on him. And now it has on us. Proverbs 1:8 says, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Listening, kids? By the way, thank you, kids, for your song. It was awesome. Second Timothy 1, verse 5. Paul's words to this young man named Timothy, who was starting into the ministry. Paul was mentoring him, and I'm sure Timothy was scared to death. Paul says, I have been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois, and then in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that now lives in you also. Fan your gift into flame. Notice it started with grandmother, it went to mother, and now it's you. God's given you a gift. Ask him what it is if you don't know what it is, and then he will help you fan it into flame. He wants you to use it. We all have at least one gift. Mothers, you have the most difficult job in the world in raising children for God's glory. And don't ever underestimate the power of your prayers. Jochebed, I should say you could be just like Jochebed, so many of you, because you've been faithful. And don't give up the fight. Hang in there. God will honor your prayers. He will honor you as you fight for your faith, for your kids. And have a happy and a blessed Mother's Day. And let God's glory, let God's presence rest on you as it did on Jochebed. Don't give up. Thank you. We're going to take communion at this time. And we have open communion. You are welcome.